The wind tore across the dead frontier, carrying with it the sting of frost and the smell of ruin. The world had broken years ago, and what little remained of its fractured civilizations clung to survival like embers refusing to die. Out of that wasteland stumbled a mother and her daughter, their alien forms wrapped in rags that no longer shielded against the cold. The mother's every step was guided by instinct: protect the child, keep her alive a little longer, but desperation carved away instinct until it left only impossible choices. Her daughter shivered violently in her arms, lips blue, eyes glazed with hunger. The mother's heart ached as she whispered promises she knew she could not keep. When she spotted the faint orange glow of a campfire, her breath caught. Fear tangled with hope. Fire meant warmth, but also danger. The stories told of humans who bartered with cruelty, demanding flesh for crumbs, warmth for obedience. Yet her daughter's tiny fingers clenched weakly at her side, reminding her there was no other chance. She gathered what strength she had left and stumbled toward the light. There he sat, a human, wrapped in patched leather, a small fire before him. Supplies rested neatly in a pack at his side. He looked up as they approached, his eyes neither hostile nor inviting, simply watchful. The mother's throat tightened. Every lesson she had carried warned her that approaching him meant risk, perhaps the final risk. But her child's trembling body left no room for pride. She lowered her gaze, voice shaking as she uttered words that shamed her soul. "One night. Just one night with me," she whispered, each syllable like glass cutting her throat. "A blanket, for her." She nudged her daughter forward, tears burning in her eyes. She had nothing else to give, nothing but herself and her child, and even that was less than survival demanded. The human's expression shifted, first confusion, then disbelief, and finally a raw sorrow that startled her. He did not reach for her, did not demand, did not barter. He rose slowly, pulled a thick, patched blanket from his pack, and draped it over the child's frail shoulders. He crouched beside the girl, tucking the edges tight, and then extended a piece of dried meat into her trembling hands. The mother stared in silence, the weight of his refusal crushing her chest in unexpected ways. Shame still gnawed at her, but so did confusion. This was not how trades were made. She tried again, certain he hadn't understood. "Please, take me. She will freeze without it." He met her eyes, his voice steady, firm but not cruel. "I don't want you. I don't want her. I'm not buying anything. Sit down. Warm yourself. You both need food and fire." The words struck harder than the wind ever could. She recoiled as if struck, clinging to her daughter. Nothing was free. Nothing in this broken world came without a price. The mother's instincts screamed trap. Yet her daughter had already devoured the food with trembling hands, her small body leaning unconsciously toward the fire. The warmth seeped into her thin skin, slowing the violent shivers. The sight of life creeping back into her child's face unraveled the mother's resolve. Still, she could not stop the suspicion grinding through her. "Why? What do you want?" Her voice cracked, brittle with exhaustion. The human shook his head. "Survival shouldn't cost your soul. Sit. Rest. That's all." He poured steaming liquid from a dented kettle into a battered cup and offered it to her. She hesitated, staring at the rising vapor. Poison, she thought. A trap. But her child had eaten without consequence, her breaths growing steadier. Against every instinct, the mother took the cup, sipping cautiously. The warmth spread through her throat, rich and real. As the night dragged on, silence sat between them, broken only by the hiss of the fire. The human busied himself, not with demands, but with simple acts, stirring the pot, adding wood, adjusting the blanket around her child. He never reached toward her, never claimed what she had so shamefully offered. The weight of his inaction unsettled her more than any demand could. Her mind whirled, painting every kindness as deceit. Yet exhaustion dragged at her bones. With her child pressed close, fed and wrapped in warmth, her eyelids finally surrendered. The last thing she saw was the human leaning against a rock, eyes open and watchful, not of her but of the world beyond the firelight. Morning came with the sound of birds that hadn't been heard in ages, faint but alive. She blinked awake to find her daughter sleeping peacefully, color returned to her cheeks. The human was already awake, setting aside portions of dried fruit and bread. He spoke without looking at her. "Eat. The cold will come again soon. You'll need your strength." She swallowed hard, unable to speak. Gratitude and fear tangled in her chest, each as sharp as the other. She had offered her dignity, her life, her child, for one blanket. And instead, she had been given food, warmth, and a night without terror. The second day on the frontier dawned pale and merciless, the sun casting no warmth on the frostbitten earth. The mother woke disoriented, her daughter pressed close under the patched blanket, cheeks no longer ghostly white but tinged with fragile color. Relief warred with dread in her chest. She had not expected to survive the night, much less without being forced to pay the price she had promised. Fear still gripped her, telling her this human was only waiting for her guard to lower. Yet the small pile of food placed beside her child told another story. He was already moving, efficient and steady, repacking his supplies, tending to the fire with practiced calm. His presence filled the silence without demand, a strange kind of stillness in a world ruled by cruelty. When he noticed her gaze, he spoke only a few words. "We should move. Staying here too long draws trouble." The mother hesitated. Movement meant exposure, new dangers, a chance to be abandoned when she slowed him down. But the thought of wandering alone with her child into the empty horizon was worse. Her pride cracked further, the decision forced by survival. She gathered the blanket, lifted her daughter into her arms, and nodded. They walked in silence, the human leading with quiet certainty. He scanned the horizon constantly, his hand never far from the knife at his belt. She watched him warily, trying to read his motives. Every step felt like waiting for betrayal. Yet as the hours passed, it became clear he carried the weight of protection as though it was second nature. He slowed his pace for her, offered water before she asked, and guided them through terrain that shielded them from the wind. Her daughter, still weak but curious, whispered questions in their shared tongue. The human could not understand, but he glanced back with a faint smile when the child's small voice carried. It was not the smile of a man calculating payment, it was simple, fleeting, unguarded. That unsettled her more than cruelty ever could. By midday, her legs trembled from exhaustion. The human noticed before she admitted weakness, gesturing toward a crumbled ruin where the walls still stood against the cold. Inside, the air was still, broken stones shielding them from the wind. He dropped his pack, drew out dried rations, and handed her a share larger than his own. She shook her head, pushing it back. "For her. Not me." His eyes narrowed, not in anger but in something close to disappointment. "You'll be no use to her if you fall. Eat." His tone left no room for argument. With trembling hands, she obeyed, though every bite carried shame, as though she stole what wasn't hers. When her daughter leaned against the human's side, drowsy and unafraid, the mother's heart clenched. It was too easy for a child to trust. Too easy to forget the dangers that lurked behind kindness. She pulled the girl back quickly, earning a puzzled glance. The human said nothing, but she saw the hurt flash briefly in his eyes before he looked away. That night, as the fire burned low in the shelter of the ruined walls, the mother could not sleep. Her thoughts clawed at her. Why had he refused her offer? Why feed them, clothe them, guide them? No man gave without taking. It was a truth she had carved into her bones since the world had collapsed. Yet every action contradicted it. He had not touched her. He had not demanded obedience. He simply guarded, shared, endured. Unable to bear the silence, she asked the question that haunted her. "Why are you helping us?" Her voice was sharp, defensive, masking the fear beneath. The human stirred the coals, his face shadowed by the flickering light. His answer was plain. "Because someone once helped me. And I lived. I won't waste what was given." The simplicity of it rattled her. No hidden bargain, no trap. Just a memory of mercy passed forward. She wanted to reject it, to call it a lie, but the steadiness in his voice carried a weight she could not dismiss. The child stirred in her sleep, murmuring softly, her small hand clutching the blanket he had given. The mother brushed a strand of hair from her daughter's face, her chest tightening. For the first time in longer than she could remember, the icy grip of despair loosened. Not gone, not broken, but eased. The human stretched out on the cold floor, placing himself closest to the entrance, his knife within reach. It was a silent declaration: if danger came, he would face it first. No demand accompanied the act, no price attached. The mother lay awake long after, torn between mistrust and the faint spark of something she had nearly forgotten: hope. She did not believe in miracles. She did not believe in second chances. But as her daughter's breathing deepened, safe and warm between them, she began to wonder if perhaps survival did not have to mean surrendering every piece of her soul. When dawn came again, she rose before he did, gathering her strength. She had expected to feel only shame when she offered her body for a scrap of warmth. Instead, she carried the weight of gratitude that frightened her far more. Gratitude made her vulnerable. Gratitude tethered her to someone who might leave. And yet, as the human stirred awake and gave her a quiet nod, she found herself stepping forward instead of shrinking back. The frontier stretched wide before them, endless and cruel. But now, three figures moved across it together, not as bargainers or debtors, but as something she did not yet dare name. The third day stretched across the wasteland with skies the color of steel, heavy with the promise of snow. The human led with his usual vigilance, his eyes scanning ridges and ruins, his steps chosen with care. The mother followed, carrying her daughter close, every step measured against exhaustion. The cold was merciless, but less terrifying than the silence inside her. She had once believed every human cruel, every kindness a disguise for chains. Yet this man's actions continued to resist her beliefs, forcing her to question truths she thought unbreakable. As the hours passed, her suspicion warred with something more dangerous: trust. She caught herself watching him not for treachery but for assurance. When he slowed to check the wind, when his hand rested lightly on the girl's shoulder to steady her across uneven ground, when he passed her the last of the water without hesitation, she felt her defenses weaken. That weakness terrified her more than hunger ever had. The girl, meanwhile, bloomed under his quiet care. Each day she walked farther, complained less, laughed softly at things her mother could not understand. She clung to the blanket he had given her, a talisman of safety she refused to surrender even in sleep. At night, she pressed close to him as naturally as if he were her kin. The mother's chest tightened at the sight, torn between gratitude and fear. To trust was to risk loss, and loss was the sharpest wound of all. By the time they reached a cluster of abandoned farmhouses, their strength was waning. The human chose one with walls mostly intact, forcing the warped door open with his shoulder. Inside, shadows stretched long, dust thick on the floor, but the roof held. He set down his pack, gathering scraps of wood for fire. The mother lingered near the entrance, uncertainty gnawing at her. She still expected a demand, a moment when the price would be named. Yet none came. He moved about with quiet purpose, his every action bent toward keeping them alive. When the fire finally caught, the girl curled near it, clutching the blanket and dozing. The mother sat across from the human, her back stiff, her eyes never leaving his face. At last, she broke the silence. "You could have left us. You could have taken everything. Why keep us alive?" He looked at her evenly, his voice steady. "Because you deserve more than to be betrayed. And she deserves a chance to grow without fear." The words struck her harder than hunger or cold. She wanted to deny them, to accuse him of lies, but the conviction in his tone left no room for doubt. For years she had lived believing survival meant bargains, sacrifices, humiliation. To hear someone speak as though her life had worth beyond what she could offer was unbearable. It cracked something inside her, and tears she had buried for too long burned hot down her cheeks. She turned away, ashamed to reveal her weakness. The human did not comfort her, did not reach for her. He simply let her weep, his silence a shield rather than a demand. When her sobs quieted, he set a bowl of thin stew beside her, nothing more said. She accepted it with trembling hands, each spoonful both nourishment and reminder of her vulnerability. That night, as snow whispered against the roof, the girl whispered drowsily, half asleep. She spoke in broken words, mixing her mother's tongue with the few human ones she had overheard. One word rang clear: Papa. The sound froze the mother where she sat today. Her daughter's small voice carried innocence, not calculation. She had chosen the word freely, binding it to the man who had asked for nothing in return. The human stiffened at the word but did not correct her. His expression was unreadable in the firelight, shadows playing across his face. The mother's heart twisted violently. She wanted to snatch the word back, forbid her child from speaking it, protect her from the risk of attachment. Yet another part of her, the part that had been shattered and beaten down for so long, clung to the sound. For the first time in years, the girl had spoken a word tied to family, to belonging. Could she deny her that? The silence stretched long into the night. The mother lay awake, her thoughts churning like a storm. Gratitude tangled with fear, affection with dread. If he left, if he betrayed them, the wound would be unbearable. But if he stayed, if his kindness was real, then perhaps the world was not as broken as she had believed. When dawn came, the human roused them quickly. Snow had fallen, coating the land in a cruel beauty. He tightened the straps on his pack, then looked to her. We can't stay long. But if you'll walk with me, I'll see you safe as far as I can. The words were simple, offered without pressure. Yet they carried a weight she could not ignore. He was not binding her, not claiming ownership, only offering choice. That freedom unsettled her more than chains ever had, because it forced her to decide, remain bound by fear, or step into the unknown with him. She looked down at her daughter, small hands wrapped in the oversized blanket, eyes bright with trust. For her child, she had bartered pride, dignity, even hope. But here was a man who asked nothing yet gave everything he could. Perhaps the world had not ended entirely. Perhaps survival was not only about what could be traded, but about who could be trusted. Her voice was soft but steady as she finally answered. We'll walk. The human nodded once, no triumph in his expression, only quiet acceptance. Together, they stepped out into the snow. 3 figures against the endless white, bound not by bargains, but by the fragile threads of something far stronger. Snow fell heavier as they pressed deeper into the wasteland, flakes cutting across the wind like shards of glass. The human set a steady pace, breaking trail through drifts that reached his knees. The mother followed close, her daughter wrapped in the patched blanket, carried only when her small legs faltered. The world seemed endless, a white horizon swallowing sound and hope alike. Yet for the first time in years, she did not walk toward nothing. She walked beside someone who seemed to see survival as more than endurance. Days passed, each one a test of will. Their food dwindled to scraps, their firewood grew scarce, but still he shared everything without hesitation. He gave her his coat when the wind grew sharp, carried the girl when her limbs failed, and watched each night with eyes that refused to close until he was sure they were safe. His quiet devotion unsettled her as much as it warmed her. No demands, no bargains, no hidden price, only actions that spoke louder than any promise could. The mother's mistrust slowly cracked under the weight of his consistency. At first she watched for betrayal, then for mistakes, then simply for reassurance that he was still there. She found herself listening for his footsteps ahead, measuring her breaths to match his, leaning on his presence in ways she swore she never would. Every survival instinct she had forged told her dependency was dangerous. Yet each time her child laughed, each time warmth spread from a fire he built, she wondered if danger was worth the risk. One night the snowstorm forced them into the remains of an abandoned outpost, its walls half buried but still standing against the wind. Inside, the girl huddled close to the human, her head resting against his side as she slept. The mother watched from across the fire, emotions twisting inside her like a blade. Gratitude. Fear. Longing. The image was almost too much to bear, her daughter at peace, sheltered not by blood or bargain, but by trust freely given. She broke the silence at last, her voice hoarse. If we slow you down, if we cost you too much, why not leave us behind? His gaze lifted from the fire. Because I've already walked alone. And I know what it takes from you. I won't let a child grow up with nothing but the cold. Her chest tightened. He spoke as though the decision had never been in question, as though carrying their weight was simply what was done. For years she had been told her life was worth only what she could trade. To hear otherwise left her unmoored. The following morning, the storm broke. Clear skies stretched over a land still blanketed in white. They walked until they reached the edge of a valley where smoke curled faintly in the distance. The humans stopped, pointing. A settlement. There may be food, shelter, maybe even people who'll welcome you. Her heart clenched. She had expected this moment, an end to the path they shared. Safety meant goodbye. She looked at her daughter, clutching his hand tightly, unwilling to let go. The child's voice was soft, almost pleading. "Don't leave, Papa." The word cut through the frozen air like fire. The mother flinched, her gaze darting to him, expecting denial, rejection, anything to remind them this was temporary. But he did not correct the girl. His eyes softened, and after a long silence, he crouched to meet her gaze. "I can walk with you a little longer." It was not a promise of forever, but it was enough. The girl beamed, clinging tighter to him. The mother turned away, her eyes burning, overwhelmed by the fragile hope blooming inside her chest. As they approached the settlement, watchful eyes appeared at the gate. The human stepped forward, speaking for them, his stance protective, his voice calm. The settlers hesitated but allowed them in. For the first time in years, the mother and her child crossed the threshold not as beggars, not as barter, but as people under the guard of someone who treated them as worth saving. Within the settlement, life was harsh but structured. There was warmth, work, and food enough to share. The human helped them find a corner to rest, then spoke quietly to her. "You're safe here. You can build something without fear." The words should have been a relief. Instead, they tore at her chest. Safe, yes, but safe meant apart from him, the one who had carried them through hunger, storms, and despair. She searched his face, desperate for a sign that he might stay. Before she could speak, her daughter answered the question for both of them. She tugged at his sleeve, eyes wide with stubborn certainty. "Home is with you." The mother expected him to falter, to remind them of reality. Instead, he rested a hand gently on the girl's head and nodded. "Then home is wherever we stand together." In that moment, the last wall inside her broke. The world had taken everything from her, left her hollow and afraid. Yet here stood a man who had given without asking, who had proved that humanity was not dead but alive in small, unshakable acts of care. She realized then that survival alone was not enough. To live meant to belong. The frontier still stretched endless and cruel beyond the settlement walls. The storms would come again, hunger would return, dangers would rise. But now they faced it as more than strangers bound by desperation. They were a family, not by blood, not by bargain, but by choice. And in that choice, fragile yet enduring, they found the one thing the wasteland could not strip away: hope.